Good morning, everybody, and good evening to those joining us from Europe. My name is Brian Whitmore. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, and I'm also the editor and coordinator of the Atlantic Council's ongoing paper series, Russia Tomorrow, Navigating a New Paradigm. This is a series we launched almost 2 years ago under the direction of Ambassador John Herbst, Senior Director of the Eurasia Center. The series seeks to illuminate various aspects of Russian politics and foreign affairs and explain what has changed and what has not changed since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Past papers have examined topics like Putin's inner circle, the geopolitics of energy, public opinion, demographics, and cyber, just to name a few. Today, we are launching the 10th paper in our series, in which the author, Angela Stent, looks at the CRINC, the new bloc, including China, Iran, and North Korea, that is supporting Russia's war against Ukraine. The report looks at the ways in which these countries are aiding Russia, what they're getting in return, and the limitations of these partnerships. It also asks the crucial question of whether the CRINC can be considered a bloc in the formal sense of authoritarian states, and if so, what the West can do in response. Like all of Angela's work, it is thorough and comprehensive. Today's discussion, of course, includes the author, Angela Stent, and an all-star panel that will be moderated and introduced by Ambassador Herbst. So that's enough from me. Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Brian and the Atlantic Council for giving me the opportunity to write this report, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion and everybody's questions. So, as we all know, Russia's war against Ukraine has brought it a new set of partners. This group is sometimes referred to as an axis. In reality, I see it as a set of intensifying bilateral ties with China, Iran, and North Korea. And these are essential for Russia's continued prosecution of the war. The presence of these countries' leaders at the military parade in Beijing in September to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Asia, with their own very specific interpretation of what happened in World War II. The presence of these countries and their fulsome commitment to a new world order, which the United States no longer dominates, suggests that these countries increasingly constitute an anti-US bloc, united not by shared values, but by shared grievances. The three authoritarian states, and of course Russia, are essential allies not only in the war on Ukraine, but also in Putin's plan for what he calls a post-West world, a global order. In Putin's vision, this is going to be a multipolar world in which the United States has lost its leading role and is only one of several powers that's setting the global agenda. And my report covers 4 questions. Brian already mentioned them. What's the nature of Russia's relationships with these revisionist powers? To what extent do they coordinate their policies? How durable are these new sets of relationships? And how might they evolve once the war, the Russia-Ukraine war, is over? So let's begin with China. China is the most important of Russia's 3 CRINC partners. And before we delve into how the partnership works, we have to remember that Russia and China are not natural allies. The partnership is increasingly asymmetric, with China as a rising power, an economic giant, while Russia struggles to prevail in Ukraine and has a per capita GDP roughly of that of Italy. But China's been the key country enabling Russia to pursue its war against Ukraine. Indeed, I don't think Putin would have invaded Ukraine in 2022 had he not been assured of China's support. I don't believe that Beijing fully grasped the extent of what Putin's ambitions were in that war, but certainly Putin believed he had Xi Jinping's tacit support. China has repeated the Russian narrative about NATO's responsibility for the war. It blames the West for the conflict. More importantly, I think China has given Russia substantial economic, military, and technological assistance for this war. And even if it's not directly exporting lethal weapons to Russia, it's certainly exporting the components that go into those weapons. China's the top purchaser of Russian hydrocarbons, and therefore it provides Russia with the financial wherewithal for the war to continue. Chinese contract soldiers are fighting with the Russian army in Ukraine, and Chinese-Russian military cooperation has increased over the past few years, and I know that Deborah will be discussing that on the panel. So despite some initial Western hopes both in the US and in Europe that Beijing could act as a mediator and help broker peace between Russia and Ukraine, China's previous anemic peace plan was never serious. China has shown no interest in bringing the war to an end. And indeed, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently told the European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, that Beijing cannot accept Russia losing the war against Ukraine, because this would allow the United States to turn its full attention to China. And this, of course, contradicts Beijing's public position that it is neutral in this conflict. China is also Russia's essential partner in seeking to challenge US and Western interests around the world and undermine the current international order. Both countries, of course, want to make the world safe for authoritarianism, both at home and abroad, globally. Both see the United States as their principal adversary, and both are promoting alternative multilateral organizations, which have no Western members. The BRICS, the expanding BRICS, more and more countries seem to want to join them, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Russia has managed to increase its influence in the global south since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and China has largely supported these efforts, even if Russia and China clearly compete for influence in parts of the global south. So despite the proclamation of a no-limits partnership, mistrust and rivalry in the Russian-Chinese relationship persists. China's wary of Russia's growing relations with North Korea, because this could embolden North Korea to act more aggressively on the Korean peninsula. And Xi might wonder also about the longer-term implications of a successful reset of US-Russian relations under President Trump. Not that that appears to be happening at the moment, but, in the longer term, I think that's what the president wants. And I think China would have to rethink then what that meant for its ties to Russia. And of course, we have areas of potential Sino-Russian rivalry and actual rivalry extend from Central Asia to Africa, to South Asia, and the Arctic. And there is the unresolved territorial issue, although this is probably a longer-term problem. But many people in China believe that the Russian Far East, which the Tsars took from the Russian Empire in the mid-19th century, rightfully belong to China and one day will be returned. And apparently there are some maps in Chinese official offices in Beijing that show the Russian Far East, the Primorsky Krai, not part of the Russian Federation, but as part of China. The Russian concern about longer-term Chinese goals was revealed in a leaked document from the FSB, the Russian Federal Security Service, which referred to China as the enemy. It warned that China is a serious threat to Russian security. But for now, Putin has framed defeating Ukraine as essential for both the survival of the Russian state and his own ability to remain in power. And without China, he believes he cannot subdue Ukraine or secure his regime's stability or his personal security too. So now let me turn to Iran. Iran remains an important partner, although I would argue it's less important than it was at the outset of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia and Iran had grown closer prior to the full-scale invasion because they were working together in the Syrian civil war. They were backing Bashar al-Assad and strengthening each other's militaries, even if their longer-term goals in Iran, in fact, diverged. Before February 2022, there were other differences between them too, say over the demarcation of the Caspian Sea, and also over what might happen in Syria after Assad was gone. Of course, they had no idea then how this would all end. Iran, however, was instrumental in assisting Russia at the outbreak of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, after Moscow failed to take Kyiv in 3 days. Iran provided Shahed drones, which the two countries now co-produce, and the Russian-Iranian defense cooperation has increased markedly since then. But Russia has been constrained in how much of its own equipment it can deliver to Iran, given its own military needs as the war continues in Ukraine. Russia and Iran have now formalized their relationship. In January 2025, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian traveled to Moscow to sign a comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia. The treaty, of course, was presented in the media as a breakthrough between the two countries. That is, however, an exaggeration if you read it. It mainly codifies ties that have developed since February 2022, and it also stipulates that Russia would not come to Iran's assistance if it were attacked by the United States or Israel or any other country. Questions also hang over the Russian-Iranian relationship since the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and the coming to power of Ahmed al-Shara, whose forces fought both Russia and Iran during the Syrian civil war. While Russia and Iran joined to support Assad and defeat the anti-Assad forces, that cooperation, of course, is over now. It's no longer relevant. And despite the fact that Syria and the Putin regime, the al-Shara forces and the Putin regime were on opposite sides during the civil war, the new Syrian leader recently visited Moscow, and Russian-Syrian relations appear to be improving, at least for now. The Russians appear to be keeping both the naval and the air base that they have in Syria. And I think that Deborah will touch more on the Syrian-Iranian relations and explain how Tehran sees all these developments. However, also, Israel's attack on Iran highlights the dilemma Moscow faces in dealing with Tehran, the limits of Moscow's influence, too. So Russia immediately condemned Israel's attacks on Iran, and Putin and Xi called for a ceasefire and negotiations. But Russia has done little to help Iran militarily. It needs Iran far less than it did at the beginning of the war, with the 22 war with Ukraine, because it is now capable of manufacturing up to 2,700 Iranian-designed Shahed drones a month inside Russia. It has those capabilities now. Russia's relations with Iran are also linked to its very complicated ties with Israel. Despite the souring of Israeli-Russian relations after the October 7th Hamas attacks, both Moscow and Jerusalem want to preserve their bilateral ties. Russia does not share Iran's goal of destroying Israel, and it has much more to gain economically from Israel than it does from Iran. Over the years, however, Iran has also become an increasingly important part of Putin's drive to replace the current international system. Even if U.S. sanctions on Moscow are lifted and U.S.-Russian ties improve, again, that doesn't seem to be happening yet, Iran will remain a political ally of Russia's and a customer for Russia's goods. If either country, of course, were to experience regime change, that might change, and the situation could look different. And finally, North Korea. North Korea, I would argue by now, is the second most important partner of Russia's in the Kremlin. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has transformed ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. North Korea immediately supported Russia after the war began, particularly at the United Nations. North Korea was one of only 2 states, and Assad's Syria was the other one, to give diplomatic recognition to the Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories of Donetsk and Luhansk in 2022. Unlike China, which often abstains on Ukraine-related votes, North Korea has voted many times to support Russia's positions on Ukraine at the UN. In 2023, in recognition of North Korean support, Russia increased its exports of food and oil to North Korea, and North Korea and Russia began to exchange high-level visits. There have been more than 24 of these since 2023. A turning point appears to have happened when Kim Jong-un attended the 2023 Far Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, where he met Putin. He visited the Vostochny Cosmodrome to see Russia's latest technology technological innovations in the space field, and we believe that Russia is now helping North Korea in terms of its own space program. Shortly thereafter, Pyongyang began supplying millions of rounds of badly needed ammunition and missiles to Russia. In return, it's believed that Russia has supplied North Korea also with missiles and, as I said, with space technology. And in the fall of 2024, Pyongyang began sending soldiers to fight in the Kursk region of Russia to dislodge the Ukrainian forces there. It's estimated that up to 12,000 North Korean soldiers have fought the Ukrainians, approximately 4,000 of whom have died. And if you've ever seen the videos that the Ukrainians made of the North Korean soldiers whom they captured, it's clear that these young men had absolutely no idea where they were going when they were shipped out, and were quite surprised when they then landed in Russia. North Korea and Russia are now formal allies. In June 2024, Putin went to Pyongyang, and the two leaders signed a treaty on comprehensive strategic partnership. And again, if you watch the videos of Foreign Minister Lavrov, Mr. Ushakov, Belousov, and all the other ones who went to Pyongyang with President Putin and were then yelled at by a young North Korean official in not very good Russian, berating them because they had dared to sit down before the great leader came in. It's pretty amusing. I don't think it's a far cry from what these gentlemen experienced when they used to go to, New York, London, and Paris. Now, the Strategic Partnership Treaty between Russia and North Korea includes a mutual defense clause obligating both parties to come to each other's defense should it be attacked by a third party. So this is different and stronger than the Iranian-Russian agreement. So what Russia is getting out of this relationship is the ammunition, the missiles, troops to fight in Kursk. Last year, North Korea has also announced that it will send thousands of military construction laborers to work in Russia. Some of those are already there. And North Korea is in addition to receiving these high-tech weapons from Russia, Russia is helping North Korea modernize in general its very antiquated Soviet-era arsenal. This is a transactional partnership. We use that word a lot. It's elevated North Korea's international profile and reinforced Putin's claim that Russia is a leader of what Moscow calls the world majority. So, is the Kremlin an axis? In my paper, I discuss the various takes on this question. There's no agreement on it. We may hear different views on this from our panel. But as the way I see it is that Russia's relations with the three countries have enabled it to continue the war against Ukraine, but they're focused on bilateral ties. Moscow has separate partnerships with all three countries, and they vary. Again, the mutual defense clause with North Korea and Iran, those two clauses are very different. The four countries have not signed a quadrilateral pact, and apart from the shared desire to upend the international order, their respective interests are not always congruent. Tensions between Russia, China, and North Korea from the Korean War still remain, and I believe that China looks very warily on the burgeoning North Korean-Russian relationship. Moscow will continue to rely on these partners for the duration of its war against Ukraine and beyond. They do collectively represent a threat to the United States and its European and Asian allies. But we have to remember that alliances of autocratic leaders often contain inherent contradictions. They might collectively share the goal of upending the international order, but they are mainly focused, these autocrats, on remaining in power and advancing their own interests, as opposed to creating this new order upon which I think none of them would totally agree. Russia might be the driver of the Kremlin today, but we could see a new reality emerge again if there are leadership changes in any of these countries. So a few final thoughts. As every Russia hand here knows, there are always two questions to any discussion in Russia. Kto vinovat? Who is guilty? And then что делать? What should we do about it? And the what should we do about it is obviously a great challenge to us as we think about confronting the Kremlin. The optics, again, of the leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea standing together in Beijing, reviewing troops and weapons, and China had some fairly sophisticated weapons during that parade. I think it was a powerful reminder that these countries are very serious about upending the current international order. I do believe that these countries do represent a growing threat to the West, both individually and collectively. And I think responding to these dangers will be difficult and it will be quite costly. Driving wedges between them, particularly between Russia and China, which I know the Trump administration had hoped to do in the beginning, driving those wedges is unlikely to work in the short term. The inherent tensions between all of them might eventually lead to a fraying of their ties, but that's unlikely to happen for the duration of this Russia-Ukraine war. Still, the bottom line is that the United States does need to devise a consistent, targeted strategy of seeking to exploit the points of tension between the two countries, however difficult that is. It should also seek to deter further aggression by Russia alone or in concert with its CRINC partners, and it should also strengthen its own defenses against future military challenges by these countries. So I will leave it now, and I will ask the other panelists to come on the stage. Thank you.
I am your surprise moderator today. Unfortunately, Andrew Denari is a little bit under the weather, so you'll have to put up with me. My name is John Herbst, and again, Angela, thank you for that comprehensive and extraordinarily insightful paper. And I especially congratulate you on the acronym that you came up with. CRINCS, I think, is not quite cranks, but really interesting.
Near it.
Yes, okay. So, unfortunately, Andrew's not the only one under the weather today. Andrea Kendall-Taylor also had to bow out at the last minute. So we have 3 panelists as opposed to 4, following, again, Angela's exceptional paper presentation. So I will start with Deborah. I want to ask you a very pointed question, a counterfactual. What would Russia's military effort in Ukraine look like without the CRINCS?
Are we being diplomatic or, okay?
I want you to be Kagan-esque, which means not diplomatic.
It would look like garbage. This is, Russia needs computer chips. They need special metals, rare earth minerals to continue to have their defense lines running. And they would not be able to do that, especially without China, on most of these major pieces of equipment. And frankly, in typical Russian fashion, as Angela pointed out, they took what they wanted from Iran, and they've improved on it massively. And they would not have any of this stuff at all without help of those other countries, because they were really running out of not only manpower, but the fundamentals that you need to run a defense production line.
Thank you, and an economical answer. All right, Marcus, we'd like your reaction to the paper's presentation on China and North Korea. What was most striking to you about that?
So a lot of thoughts, but I want to begin with the idea that this paper draws on history to be forward-looking, very appropriate for an alum of the National Intelligence Council, right? And so this idea of getting ahead of the problem and recognizing it's getting worse. And it could take different directions, but in the end, I think the most striking part is drawing on the history and showing that the trend line is not good. It's unhelpful for our interests. And the idea that we need to sort of think about this in a new paradigm. And so there's some terminology that I'm going to hit on here in a second that I thought was very powerful and important. But in the end, I agree completely with Deborah on this idea that China is so vital to Russia's war effort, and the fact that the paper underscores that, I think, is really vital. And then despite the wariness that China has toward Russia itself, and that Russia has toward China, and then of course that, as you pointed out, the wariness that China has about what the Russia-North Korea relationship would mean, despite all this wariness, they're still moving forward. And that wariness actually should worry us in a way, that they're still willing to go forward, and the potential for misunderstanding and miscalculation actually to lead to further expansion of conflict with these adversaries, because there isn't that deep understanding of, they don't know how far the other is going to go, so they can miscalculate. So the China piece, I think in particular, highlights the dynamic of China acting in its own interests in a way to support Russia, that even if there's not this trust or support, that China's going to continue to do that. So that really came across to me. The North Korea piece is the one, of course, I study the closest and have a long history of that as former NIO for North Korea. And I really appreciated, and it really did jump out at me, it did strike me, characterizing the Russia-North Korea relationship correctly as an alliance. I don't hear that term often enough. I actually heard a South Korean scholar say this in an event I was at last week, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's a terrible thing to admit the fact that now Russia and North Korea are in an alliance, but they are. And that really did strike me. And even though we do use the term, and correctly so, transactional, these transactions are strategic, they're important transactions. Russia's blocking of the panel of experts to monitor and enforce North Korean sanctions is key. And so it's not just about the physical transactions of equipment, of hardware, of the resources that you mentioned in the report going back, the technology transfer, but it's the fact that there's been some strategic transactions going on with this mutual support. And in a way that could be very problematic, as I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, of what means for stability in the Indo-Pacific. There's so many other things in the report that I'd like to pull the thread on, but I feel like I'm going too long, so I'll stop there.
Okay. Deborah, now coming back to you to talk about Iran. Let's see now. There's a lot in this report on that. Your sense of the relationship between those two countries and its meaning for us.
Well, I think more broadly, I want to get at one point that Angela skirted on when you talked about it, which is that I think we sometimes give Russia way too much credit for thinking that it thinks broadly strategically on these relationships and how it gets things done. They are very transactional. They take what they need. They move on, but they rarely look at the second and third order consequences. It's just not the way they do business. And so I think sometimes if we look for these deep-seated strategies of what Russia's trying to do, and we see this in our media every day, I think you're gonna end up with nothing, a big cup of nothing, because there's no big deep-seated strategy. It's what they need for the time now and what they're gonna do with it. And so that's the first thing. So on Iran, it's an interesting dynamic. First of all, the relationship goes back really, really far. And I think 2 years after the revolution, Russia had already established a relationship with Iran. So this is not anything new. I think people were focused on Syria and thought somehow this was a new relationship, but it's not. And Russia's support for Hezbollah and Hamas goes back 40 years. So again, this was not something new. They had sort of a condominium with the Iranians for quite some time. They were a net exporter of military equipment to Iran, as they were to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and to Syria as well, going back to the late 70s and early 80s. So there's a long history there, and it's not as recent as some people make it out to be. Having said that, their relations with Israel, and that Angela mentioned, and other things, they don't always dovetail, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to have that relationship as long as it's convenient for them to upset any stability in the Middle East, because chaos is important to Putin, and if he could make things less comfortable for other countries in the Middle East, then he'll do that. Now, let's not forget that Russia was the country that enabled Iran's nuclear program by giving them the initial centrifuges, which they claim were for commercial nuclear reactors. And for a country that had more natural gas than God, that was kind of interesting why they suddenly would need nuclear energy, because they have enough fossil to get them through the next several hundred years. Having said that, they gave them the centrifuges. The Iranians reverse engineered them And the Russians always seem to be surprised when other countries take their technology and do what they want with it. They're constantly surprised by this. I don't know why. It's happened so many times with China as well, where they just reverse engineer the Russian technology. So Iran did that, and they had, voila, centrifuges. And the problem with the JCPOA was, there were many problems with it, but one of the main thing is, you put the fox in the hen house. We were allowing Russia to be the guarantor of how Iran used that fissile material. And that's kind of like, well, I won't get into it, but being a Chicagoan, it's kind of like trusting the guy who's got a gun at your head to not kill you, And it backfired, obviously, to take that analogy to an illogical conclusion. So I think it was sort of doomed from the beginning because you were allowing a country that gave Iran the capability to become a nuclear power. You were allowing that country to be the one who was going to monitor this, as opposed to anyone from the international community. What Russia has done now is it's taken everything they've wanted from this faster, better, cheaper Iranian Shahid drone, and what is now flying against Ukraine and against NATO countries is no longer that Shahid drone. This is not your grandfather's drone anymore. It's been souped up, as Marcus will tell you, based on Chinese, North Korean technology. They have everything they wanted from Russia in that factory, from Iran in that factory. And so now, I think the big watchword that I would get to is, Russia has to pay something back. And Russia still has military superiority in a number of places that Iran wants, that China wants, that North Korea want. And that, to me, is the dangerous thing going forward.
Okay, thank you. Angela, back to you. Which bilateral relationship of the Krinks should concern the U.S. the most?
Okay, I'll come to that in a minute. Just to add a couple of things to what Deborah said. So in the paper I quote, a Russian official a number of years ago saying, we fear a pro-American Iran much more than a nuclear Iran. So, I've had conversations with Russians in the past, or officials, who didn't seem to be that worried about it. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you saw that, but apparently a couple of days ago, a former Iranian foreign minister in some interview said, the Russians really don't want us to improve our relations with the West. They had this really invested in it. So those are two other points. I would say on your question, the relationship with China is the one that should give us most pause, just because of the way that the Chinese have been, again, facilitating what Russia is doing in the war against Ukraine, and then obviously China's own ambitions against Taiwan and its own neighborhood. And then its economic clout. Look, they've just said that they put a stop on us getting their rare earth minerals. So they have a lot of economic as well as military power. So I think we have to be most concerned of putting Russia aside, right? Most concerned about China there.
Okay, thank you. Deborah, the war in Ukraine has not just provided military tech information or tech exchange, but insights on weaknesses of Western weapon systems. What are U.S. adversaries learning on the battlefield in Ukraine, and what should the West do about that?
Well, I think Marcus is going to have really great insight about China and North Korea on this, but Ukraine is the ultimate test bed for the modern battle space. And every enemy of the United States, of NATO, of any Western country is watching this battle space really carefully to see what can happen. And so part of the reason why some of these countries in the Krinks are giving these systems to Russia to work with in Ukraine is to see how they go up against the enormous quantity of Western systems that are operating every day in Ukraine. We've seen, and it's been in public, that the Patriot PAC-3 and its interceptors are having a difficult time handling new maneuverability among Russian cruise and ballistic missile systems. And in some ways, our enemies are moving much more quickly to develop things that can defeat our systems than we are to counter that defeat. And so not only are they looking at performance, they're also looking at how much time it takes the West to make the changes, to make those systems to remain efficient, reliable, and defensible in the system. So I think what we have here is this, instead of AI generated or somewhere out in Fort Huachuca, we have a very real-time test of seeing the billions and billions of dollars that we in the West have put into our military systems. We're now seeing which will succeed, which fail, and if we're dynamic and flexible enough to make the changes that we need to make via software, via components, via 3D printing, and the whole host of other things to respond to that. And so again, I caution, it's not just the systems themselves, but the timing in which we develop countermeasures.
Thank you. Marcus, I have 2 questions for you, so please try and answer them promptly. President Trump yesterday commented, he was asked if he would talk to President Xi about reducing China's purchases of Russian oil, and seemed to suggest that he would. I also saw reports today that suggesting that China's begun to do that. What's your reaction to all this?
I don't trust China. That's my number one reaction. And I think China over and over again, you have their leadership, even their state media, make the implication that they're going to take, some U.S. concern into account. Xi Jinping can say whatever he wants privately to various presidents of the United States, and at the end of the day, China, makes excuses and doesn't follow through. The number of times where the Chinese have promised to do something on North Korea, or have explained, oh, hey, this is very difficult, but we're pressuring North Korea and we're restraining them, and then they don't deliver. So I am very, very skeptical that the PRC is actually going to follow through on applying significant pressure to Russia, because China has a track record of not following through on applying pressure when even it's in their interest to apply pressure. So I'm very, very skeptical, regardless of what has been said.
Thank you. Okay. One of our esteemed peers, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Germany, reports that North Korea has also given Russia almost $10 billion in aid besides manpower. What do you make of this?
So one of the considerations I know in that report was how much is being provided in comparison to how little we're seeing coming back to North Korea. And so looking at this in terms of analytic methodology, we can make the assumption that Kim Jong-un is a lousy deal maker and is an idiot, and he's made a bad deal and he's given all this stuff to Russians and he's not getting much in return. Or we can come to the recognition that there is a piece of the puzzle that doesn't neatly fit into the numbers that are publicly available. And so there's a whole bunch of hypotheses, and I'm not going to go through them point by point, but I will say this. There are things, number one, that are intangible that North Korea is getting out of this that we're not giving sufficient credit for. And I want to go to what Deborah was saying is really critical, is the fact that Russia is essentially field testing North Korean weapons on behalf of North Korea, on behalf of Kim Jong-un's regime, and then therefore enabling North Korea to refine the accuracy and the missile defense evasion of those missiles is a hugely important intangible benefit that it's hard to measure exactly how much that's worth, but that's worth something. And it's critical to note that Ukrainian military intelligence has been publicly saying that North Korean missiles have dramatically improved in terms of accuracy and in terms of evasion of missile defenses since the North Korean missiles started being used. And then, of course, thanks to the work of the Defense Intelligence Agency in revealing some information through technical analysis that was released under the leadership of my friend Scotty Barrier when he was DIA director, it's clear that these are not like old missiles that North Korea is pulling out of stocks. These are new production things. We're seeing the components. We can tell these are newer missiles. Now, we don't know all the details, and certainly there is details I'm sure our government knows that we can't make publicly available, but we're talking about iterative new production of North Korean systems where they can benefit. So that's one example. But also, here's the other thing. Russia is not providing publicly available information on a level of its trade with North Korea. China conceals the vast majority of its trade with North Korea. So I laugh when I see these statistics about China's trade with North Korea going up and down. We're just seeing the part that's not sanctioned, right? In the case of Russia and North Korea, the trade, what's going back and forth, it's a black box, let's be honest. And so the idea that Kim Jong-un is not getting as much or more out of it than what he's getting out of Russia, I think that's a very dangerous assumption. And like I said, I feel like we could do a whole seminar on just, maybe we should, just on what North Korea is getting out of this.
Okay, Deborah, I'm going to throw you a fastball right down the middle, playing off of Marcus's comments. What does it mean when North Korea is providing for use in Ukraine its most advanced missiles, which Russians are improving, when Russia is launching ballistic missiles at Ukraine, then you find Western, not just analysts, but statesmen saying that giving Tomahawks to Russia, to Ukraine, is escalatory?
I'm a big fan of escalation, so I should probably start with that. I think we have lost sight of the definition of deterrence. And I think this is really fundamental, because deterrence means that you should take actions that stop people from trying to kill you, as opposed to waiting for them to kill you and then take the action. And what we have seen all too often in the past administration and the current administration is this paranoia about escalation, which then undercuts any concept of deterrence. And I won't say who, but having conversations with some allies this week, their concern is that responding to Russia's air incursions and drone incursions into NATO countries, that the response won't be strong and robust enough now that will lead to people dying later. And so what I say is that this is very legitimate. It's not just the Tomahawks. It is understanding that not every conflict is a war. Not every military action is a conflict. And that you can take actions and you're done and move on. You can have a conflict and you're done and you move on. This concept that everything you do is going to be a World War III is abject nonsense, and it fits into Xi Jinping's and Vladimir Putin's and Kim Jong-un's narrative.
I would have one thing to just adjust. We're in World War III already. It just hasn't gotten to a full-scale, conventional nuclear exchange. But World War III has already started. That's my view.
Okay. Quick answer, Deborah, please. The state of Russian-Iranian relations, what do you see of it?
Oh, I think the state of Russian-Iranian relations, I think they'll continue the way they're going. I mean, as long as both sides can get something out of it, why not? It is, what's the quid pro quo? And again, I think what people should be concerned about who watch the Middle East, and make no mistake, Israel has really set back Iran by years and years, along with the United States. But there is technology that Russia has, especially in aircraft, in their ability to shoot missiles that can evade countermeasures, that Iran definitely needs. Their air defense was, nothing lights up anymore when something overflies Iran. That's all, the lights are all out. So this is very similar to 1982 in the Bekaa Valley, when all of these Russian-made equipment, Soviet-made equipment was knocked out in about 15 minutes by the Israelis. So right now, there's a crunch time. Russia has to make a decision whether they're going to give more upgraded air defense and the like to Iran. That hasn't happened yet, but it could happen. And that creates another problem for everyone, what they're trying to do in the Middle East.
Okay, Angela, the last question from me is for you. At the end of your report, you talk about containing the ambitions of the cranks. What are the strategies that the U.S. should follow to do this?
Well, I think we have to, the things that we've already been heard about that we should be concerned about are clearly North Korea upgrading its own nuclear program, Iran, in fact, acquiring nuclear weapons. So I think those are things that we clearly have to pay great attention to. But I think it's, we have to have a concerted policy. We have to have a view that integrates all of these issues, and we need to have, we need to make decisions to pursue these policies. And at the moment, I don't see that happening either in the US or really with our allies.
I agree. Thank you very much. Okay, we have time for about 10 minutes of audience questions. I'll start here. Okay, right here. And then I also have virtual questions, too.
Good morning. Ariel Cohen, the Atlantic Council. Terrific presentation from Angela in her tip-top shape. Question about U.S. strategy. There are a lot of chatter, some leaks about the forthcoming national security doctrine and the national military doctrine. That is probably going to be the most inward-looking doctrine, at least in my memory, focusing on the Western Hemisphere and homeland. We're talking about Eurasia, we're talking about Eastern Hemisphere. How do you think these two doctrines are going to affect our interests globally in Europe, Ukraine, as well as what are the implications in East Asia in view of the remark that we're in the middle of slow-rolling World War III? Thank you.
Angela,
You should take
So if we're talking about defending the homeland of the United States, China, North Korea, and Russia all pose a nuclear threat to the United States homeland. And so I would not underestimate the potential for all of these issues to become interconnected. Look, I don't know what's going to be in the NDS. We'll see how it evolves, but I don't think a increased focus on the threat to the United States itself and to the Western Hemisphere in particular, and remember, part of the U.S. homeland is a little bit outside of the Western Hemisphere, that's necessarily incompatible. But then also, when you look at the threats that the countries are posing in the non-military sphere to U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere. Again, I think there's a way to reconcile this idea of refocusing on the defense of the homeland and still confronting the crinks, because part of the crinks approaches, maybe not strategy, but approaches, is to use all these non-military means to go after the U.S. homeland, and then also to pose a nuclear threat to the homeland as a key element of their approach to basically causing us to hesitate, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a factor.
I think that's very important. I mean, looking at the sabotage that Russia and China and Iran and North Korea too are carrying out in different parts of the world, in our own country, among our allies, that has to be part of a national security strategy. It's not just the military.
Yeah. John, if one other word on this. I think the whole concept of national security strategies that are supposed to last for a couple of years have seen their heyday, and we're past that now. The modern battle space, the dynamic of everything that in the cyber and space and everything else means that whatever is published now will be OBE in less than a year. And the threats change dynamically, and the reason why it hasn't been published yet is because the threats are changing dynamically. And so defending your homeland is not how some people in the MAGA world define it, which is that we just have this tiny little place, and they look at CONUS. They don't even look outside of CONUS. And it's exactly what Marcus said, which is that these threats come from all over the place. You can defy and say, I'm not a globalist, but the fact of the world, it is a world. It's a global world. And you can deny it, you can continue to be in denial, but defending the homeland means to be able to defeat the people who want to see you gone.
Okay, thank you. You're going to have to bear with me as I try this virtual question. Hopefully you hear the voice of the questioner. Or not. Oh, wait a minute, there it is.
Is it possible that other countries will join Russia in their coalition against Ukraine and against the Western countries.
Want to try that, Angela? That was Vladko Boychuk.
I mean, I don't see that at the moment. Obviously, most of the countries in the global south have either not taken sides in this conflict, or they essentially repeat Russia's narrative and more or less support what Russia's doing. But that doesn't mean that they are going to join this, if we're talking about in a military sense, facilitating what Russia is doing. Now, we can talk about Cuba. Apparently, there are Cuban soldiers now fighting in Ukraine. There have been soldiers from India, many other countries that are assisting the Russian war effort, even though they might not have known exactly what they were getting into. But I personally don't see any other country at the moment that would, in fact, support Russia, apart from the troops, but militarily with weapons in this coalition. But I think there are plenty of countries, and if, again, look at all the countries that were in Beijing for this celebration of the end of World War II in Asia, from different parts of the global south, and even a few from Europe. And that will just show that these countries are not going to push back against what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and many of them still regard the US and its allies as their antagonists.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. I think we have someone over here.
Hi, my name is Jack Kropensky, unaffiliated. The headline here is that this is about Ukraine. I'm just wondering how much of the report would apply outside of Ukraine and how much maybe doesn't apply other places like Georgia or Moldova or any place where Russia has malign influence, whether it's in Africa and maybe in common with China, and then whether India comes into this at all.
So, I mean, I think that the point of the report itself was to look at how these countries are assisting Russia in the war in Ukraine, but they obviously would support Russia in whatever it's doing, either in the in Eurasia in general or in other countries. But I think they're so much focused, these countries, on assisting Russia in prevailing in Ukraine, and I don't see where that would apply elsewhere. I don't know if other people have a different view of this.
Okay.
So I think there's one thing important to keep in mind is that China, Russia, and North Korea are cooperating in various ways in the Indo-Pacific, and China and Russia are doing things like joint nuclear-capable bomber flights off the coast of Alaska, and we're totally sleeping on it. Russia and China are aligned in the Indo-Pacific in a way that we are vastly underestimating and not paying enough attention to.
Okay, I'm going to try again a virtual question, which hopefully will appear on the screen. Hopefully. It's from Katerina Adarchenko. And it follows up what you just said, but for some reason, it's not coming up. Oh, there it is. I'll read it out. Is the Russia-China partnership truly strategic, or is it mainly a pragmatic arrangement where Moscow serves as a raw materials appendage to Beijing? And does any genuine ideological alignment exist between the two beyond the facade of authoritarian convenience? Marx and then Angela.
Okay.
So I think we're setting the bar way too high for what constitutes alignment.
Yeah.
Look at the Second World War and tell me, was the Empire of Japan under its military dictatorship and Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler and then the fascist regime under Mussolini, were they really truly ideologically aligned? I mean, we're talking about countries that had mutually opposing racial theories, right?
Yeah.
Who really, if they were located next to each other, would have absolutely hated each other, but they're just located in different parts of the world. So I think the premise of the question is sort of irrelevant to really what's strategically going on. No offense to the questioner, but what matters is what the behavior is and how it's driven. And I think there is a lot more alignment in reality that we're underestimating and we're sleeping on, because look at the axis in the Second World War. This, in my view, no offense, it's an axis very similar to the one that we faced in the Second World War.
Angela.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, I think it is a strategic partnership in many ways, even though there are a lot of differences between them. And I think even though they don't share the same ideology, I mean, I guess China is still nominally a communist country, they they share a common belief, grievances against the U.S. and wanting to get rid of the, post-Cold War system that existed and diminish the U.S. role in it, the democracy's role in it, and have a world that is, safe for authoritarianism.
That'll be the last word.
Yeah, it is ideology, because the ideology is anti-US, anti-the West. And so that is ideologically enough to have that relationship. And it's sort of like that old Marx Brothers movie, showing my age here, which whatever you're for, I'm against it. And it's if you're going to move toward a direction of where you want to get things done and they don't want you to succeed, they're going to be against it. So it is an ideology. Maybe we're looking for something too deep-seated, like Socratic on this. It doesn't have to be that.
Well, and I think the domestic ideology of a lifetime rule by a strong man, that unites those three countries as well.
And perhaps a growing lifetime for those men.
Yeah, 150 years, remember? They discussed that in Beijing.
It's already 12 o'clock. Unfortunately, I can't take more questions. I'm just going to make one more point related to this question. I'm sorry, we're out of time. I apologize for that. But Philip Zellico wrote an article, I think in the Texas Strategic Review last summer, the summer of 24, saying the cooperation amongst these crinks is greater than that amongst the Axis powers before Pearl Harbor. Just a thought.
Yeah, again, no offense to Philip, but I said it before he wrote that. I said it to Fred. I can prove it.
I believe you. I said many things before they were written down by
fair
others.
Enough. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Angela, for a great report. Deborah and Marcus for a great conversation.